Hi, I'm Esther Miller, and I want to thank Andrea for inviting me to join in some of her broadcasts. And she's been asking me a lot of questions, which I thought I would just sit down with a cup of tea with you and talk about it. So, what kind of thread is the best for hand quilting? I think that's a matter of preference, depending on what the kind of quilting you like to do. And I need a special thread that's very durable and will not tangle easily, and I don't have to use short ends because it will not ravel or turn into knots. So I've tried out a lot of different kinds of threads, and I always have ended up preferring using the Wile thread. It's got long fibers so that it will not ravel easily. They're on wooden spools. I like that too, but that's just optical. And the thread is 100% cotton, slightly glazed, but made with long fibers so that it will not tangle. I often take up to almost a yard of thread at once, and by the time I get to the end of the thread, very seldom that it has any tangles whatsoever. For that reason, I don't need any kind of beeswax or anything to glaze it. It is slightly glazed already. But this is, of all the different kinds I've used, I prefer this the most. You mentioned that some people use embroidery thread, other lightweight threads. If I'm doing something very, very fine, I will take a lighter weight than this. There's also a very fine thread that I do enjoy using, but I never use embroidery thread. For me, embroidery thread would be something that I would do for a surface embellishment. And a lot of people that use big stitches, the point is so that you see the thread. For me, that's not the point. I don't want to see the thread, I want to see the profile. So I'm not doing a surface embellishment with the thread. I'm doing it with the forms that I can quilt into it with the small stitches. For me, it's important to be able to quilt in all directions. I love to put all kinds of very decorative forms into my quilt. And if I have to stop and go because I can only quilt in one direction, that's very inefficient. It seems to be most natural to quilt toward yourself, but it's very helpful to be able to quilt away from yourself, and there's good hand techniques to learn how to do that. And I will be showing how to learn these techniques in my video clips too. But I would suggest anyone that loves to do hand quilting should really concentrate on learning how to use your hands so that you can quilt in all directions. Well, for me, growing up Amish, we had our quilts always put into a square frame so that it was completely straight all the way around. And of course, we started at the edge. And as we worked, the quilt bars were rolled in toward the middle. And so I've never started a quilt in any other place except at the edge. Very often I've heard that you should start in the middle. And honestly, I can't figure that out, because if you start in the middle and if there's uneven parts that get spread out toward the end, what happens to your edge? I'm not sure about that. It seems to me it's not really logical. Every quilt often has certain places that aren't quite even, and it's not difficult to take care of these uneven parts by hand, especially if you're hand quilting. You can compensate very well and you'll never see it afterwards. But you do want a straight edge, don't you? Is there a best way to baste a quilt for hand quilting? Yes, that's not to baste at all. I have never basted a quilt before I quilted, unless I had to take it out of the frame without expecting to. So I don't have much experience in basting, and I prefer not to have a lot of it. But I do know that for many people, this is part of the procedure before they start hand quilting. But that has something to do with the way they quilt and the frame they're using, or if they're not using a frame at all. And I know a lot of people work on the floor, which I cannot imagine doing, knowing how difficult that would be for me, especially with at my age and with my disabilities of artificial knees. But anyway, so the easiest way, if you really do need to baste your quilt, is just simply to build a simple frame out of 4 slats of wood, a little bit bigger than your quilt is going to be, some masking tape to tape a strip of fabric on each one of the rails, square it up perfectly, and put your quilt in there first, using the backing first, being sure it's squared, putting your batting on top, and then the top, fastening it completely around the edge with pins so that you know it's completely straight. Then you start on the edge basting, and just like the Amish would quilt, you would keep rolling it in until you get to the middle and everything is basted. Then you can unravel it, take it out, and quilt it in whichever frame you prefer to use. So what kind of a frame do you want to use to quilt? It's definitely important to have a frame, and it depends on your living conditions as to whether you have room for a standing frame, whether you really need to have something that's very versatile and very movable. There's so many different living conditions that makes a difference. And for that reason, it makes sense that a lot of people do need to baste their quilts if they're going to be using a different kind of, that is any kind of frame that's not a standing frame. Growing up, of course, we always used the simple Amish frames, and it's a simple frame that anybody can build for themselves. Living in Germany is quite different than living on a farm with big rooms where you have plenty of space to set up a big Amish frame. And so I soon realized I'm going to need a different solution to be able to quilt effectively without taking up all the space, because if I'm quilting alone, I'm not going to get that quilt done in a day like you do if you have lots of help around an Amish frame. So we've been working at a concept to make it possible in a small area to be able to quilt just as effectively as you can in a big standing frame. And we'll be showing you pictures of the quilt frames that we've developed according to my standards of what's important to be able to get the tension right on all the different levels. And because the tension is very important, that you can adjust it according to the way you quilt. And quilting with the way I do, with very fine, even stitches, you need to have both hands free. And for this reason, it would be impossible for me to even imagine trying to quilt without a frame. So we've developed different methods. We have this long standing frame, but also a big round hoop that's adjustable in every position from sitting on the floor to standing, with different size hoops, but your hands are free. As well as another frame that you can actually, it's just much smaller, and you sit on the plate that holds it stable, and it's also adjustable. You can turn it in all directions. But the way I quilt, I very, very seldom even move the hoop. If I do have a project that I need to use, that I want to use this round hoop with, I don't change the position until I can't reach across the hoop anymore, because I like to continue quilting in all directions as far as I can reach into the middle of the hoop. I really don't know exactly what to suggest would be best for beginners. I guess it depends on how you really would want to quilt. Maybe you can only quilt in one direction. If that's the case, a hoop is probably the best, but it needs to be fastened in a way that you have your hands free, or you will be handicapped as really making even stitches. For me, it's really important that the markings are not very dominant, that they're very fine, that they're easy to remove, and that they don't hurt the fabric. When it comes to light backgrounds, I prefer the lead from the Ultimate Marking Pencil. You can also get, it's a very fine lead. It's only 1/2 millimeter. It fits into most mechanical pencils that are only 1/2 millimeter, 0.5 millimeters in diameter. And they're very fine. They're erasable. You can wash them out. But if you draw very lightly and you quilt fine, you won't even see it afterwards, and you don't have to do anything with it. If I'm working on dark fabrics, then I'm going to need something with a contrast. And so I've gone to, most of these pencils are known most everywhere, but the only one I use is the white. I have trouble getting the other colors to come back out. There's a disadvantage to the white. If you are working with it, it will tend to disappear because it's chalk. And if you rub across it with your arm, then it can disappear pretty quickly. And so it's always a good idea to have the pattern that you have drawn on there close by, so you can lay it back on and retrace it if you need to. I always save all my patterns that I've drawn onto the quilt nearby so that I can check and see that I'm really sticking to the pattern and might have to repair a few of the drawings. I really don't want to ever use anything that can damage the material, and a lot of the iron out or the washaways can damage your material, and they can also reappear. And I've seen beautiful quilts, very well done, but the markings were so obvious that they were ruined. And that's too bad after you put all that work in a beautiful quilt, if you've ruined it with your marker. So thanks for being with us and watching this first episode with Quiltingfor4. And we'd like to suggest that you would check into our channel and see some really detailed instructions on hand quilting. I have been presenting all the techniques that I've been teaching these years. And if you're interested in learning more about hand quilting, it's a good place to get connected. Be sure to also check out Andrea's blog, Quiltingfor4, as well as our web shop, Miller's Quilting. Here you will find all the tools that I've been describing in our YouTube channel, and the links you will find in the description below. So please like and subscribe, ring the bell to be informed, and I hope to see you soon again. And as you see here too, that quilting connects more than 3 layers of fabric.